The morning light in Edinburgh falls softly across the cobblestone streets, the kind of light that makes the grey stones glow with a gentle warmth. In a tall stone house on South Charlotte Street, the windows are still closed against the early chill, but inside, a small boy is already listening. His name is Alexander Bell, though everyone calls him Alec. He was born right here in this house on the 3rd of March in the year 1847. The world outside is quiet, save for the distant rumble of a carriage and the faint cry of gulls from the Firth of Forth. But inside, Alec is attending to smaller sounds, the hiss of the coal fire, the creak of the staircase beneath his mother's careful step, the soft hum of a tuning fork that his father left on the mantelpiece. The house itself is a place of shadows and whispers. Its high ceilings and thick walls hold the voices of generations of Bells, all of them people who studied speech and sound. Alec's grandfather, also named Alexander, was an actor and a teacher of elocution who could make a single-syllable dance across a room. His father, Melville Bell, is a man with a gentle voice and a mission to map every movement of the human mouth, to diagram the invisible shapes of spoken words. Even the air in this home seems to carry the weight of careful listening. Alec's earliest memories are not of nursery rhymes read aloud, but of watching his father's lips, observing the precise way his tongue touched his teeth when he said a word like bell or light. The house on South Charlotte Street has a small garden at the back, walled in by stone and shielded from the city's noise. Here, in the spring, Alec's mother Eliza tends to her roses and lavender. She moves through the garden with a quietness that Alec does not fully understand yet. She bends to smell a flower, and when she looks up at him, she does not call out. Instead, she touches her hand to her throat, then to her lips, then points to him. Eliza Bell is deaf. She has been losing her hearing since she was a young girl, and now the world has grown almost entirely silent for her. But she has not retreated from sound. She still feels it. She places her fingers on the soundboard of the piano when someone plays, and she smiles at the vibration. She teaches Alec to speak close to her forehead, so she can feel the breath and the resonance of his words against her skin. The garden becomes their special place, a room without walls where the wind through the lavender makes a sound Alec can hear, but his mother can only sense as a gentle pressure in the air. He learns, without being told, that sound is more than something you hear. It is something you can feel, something that passes through bone and skin and earth. He presses his ear to the stone wall to hear the trickle of water far inside, and he understands that sound travels where he cannot go. Inside the house, the drawing room is dominated by a dark wooden piano and a tall window that looks out onto a quiet street. On afternoons when the rain comes, a soft gray light fills the room and Alec sits at the piano bench, not always to play, but to experiment. He presses the keys one at a time and watches the strings vibrate through the open top. He notices that when he presses the pedal, a note can linger, filling the room with a ghost of itself. His father sometimes joins him here, not to teach music, but to demonstrate his visible speech system, a series of diagrams that look like arcane symbols. Melville Bell has invented a way to write down any sound that a human mouth can produce, no matter the language. He shows Alec how a single symbol stands for the position of the tongue, another for the shape of the lips, another for the breath. To Alec, it is like a magical map, a key to all the voices of the world. He begins to see speech as a physical architecture, a series of movements, not just air and noise. The rain taps quietly on the window and the afternoon deepens, but the boy remains absorbed, tracing the symbols with his finger and silently forming the shapes with his own mouth. In these moments, the seeds of his future are being planted, not in a flash of lightning, but in the patient, peaceful repetition of a rainy Edinburgh afternoon. The house on South Charlotte Street is also filled with books, shelves and shelves of them, many about acoustics, physiology, and the science of language. Alec pulls down a volume on the anatomy of the ear and spends hours studying the intricate diagrams of the cochlea and the tympanic membrane. He is fascinated by the idea that the ear is a tiny, exquisite mechanism, a drum that vibrates in sympathy with the air. He builds his first invention at the age of 12, a simple device to remove the husks from wheat by using a nail brush and a rotary paddle. It is a modest success, but more importantly, it teaches him that he can translate an idea into metal and wood. His father's study is a warm room with a fireplace and a large window overlooking the street. Alec often sits there in the evening, while his father writes letters by the light of an oil lamp. The lamp casts a golden circle on the desk, and the shadows gather in the corners of the room. The scratch of the pen is the only sound, a sound that seems to carry the whole world with it, the world of words and thoughts traveling down through the hand and onto the paper. Alec watches the ink dry into delicate shapes, understanding that a written word is just a captured vibration, a thought frozen in time. When Alec is still a boy, the family moves to a larger house at 13, Charlotte Square, one of the most beautiful addresses in Edinburgh, a sweeping curve of Georgian stonework that encloses a private garden. The new house is grander, with a first-floor drawing room that has 3 tall windows looking out onto the square. The garden in the center is a quiet green heart where the trees rustle and the paths are graveled. Alec plays there with his brothers, Melville and Edward, but he is often found simply sitting on a bench, watching the birds and listening to the layers of sound, the clop of horses on the cobbles, the murmur of conversation from passers-by. The wind shaking the leaves, and beneath it all, the deep, continuous hum of the city itself. He begins to think of the world as a great symphony, with each sound occupying its own place in the air. He can close his eyes and separate the strands. It is a form of meditation, a way of being alone in the middle of a city. His mother cannot hear these layers, but Alec takes her hand and places it flat against the glass of the window. She feels the faint vibration of a passing cart, and her face softens with understanding. This touch becomes their shared language, a bridge between silence and sound. The boy who listens to silence is also a boy who loves the water. Edinburgh is a city built around the Firth of Forth, a broad estuary that opens into the North Sea. On clear days, the family takes walks along the shore at Portobello, where the waves slide onto the sand with a soft, rhythmic hush. Alec takes off his shoes and feels the cold water swirl around his ankles. He notices how sound travels differently over the water. A fisherman calls from a boat far offshore, and the sound reaches him clear and distinct, as if the water were a polished mirror for voices. He cups his hands behind his ears to gather the sound, and the world sharpens. He wonders, in that quiet way that children wonder, if sounds could be caught in a bottle, or sent along a string, or carried across the whole vast ocean without losing their warmth. He does not yet know the word for what he is imagining, but he is already dreaming of the telephone. He is dreaming not of a machine, but of a way to let voices travel to people like his mother, a way to fold distance into nothing, a way to make the world smaller and more intimate. As the sun sets over the Firth of Forth and the water turns to gold, he turns for home, his pockets full of seashells and his head full of quiet music. In the Bell household, the absence of sound is not an emptiness, but a presence, a different kind of room. Eliza Bell moves through the house with a grace that seems choreographed by light itself. She cannot hear the kettle whistle, so she watches the shape of the steam. She cannot hear the front door knocker, so she feels the vibration through the wooden floor. Alec learns to communicate with her in a language of touch and gesture and exaggerated lip movements. He places her hand against his cheek while he speaks, and she reads the changing shape of his jaw, the rise and fall of his larynx, the rush of breath as he forms a word. He learns to speak slowly, not because she is slow, but because he wants each word to land like a soft pebble on the surface of her palm. This slow, deliberate speech will shape his entire understanding of communication. He comes to believe that speed is not the point of talking, connection is. The most important words should be spoken as carefully as a key turning in a lock. In the evenings, when the lamps are lit and the curtains drawn, the family gathers in the parlor. Melville Bell reads aloud from a book, and Alec watches his mother's face, which rests in her hands, her fingers lightly touching the table or the arm of her chair, feeling the sound through the wood. She is listening in her own way, and the room is full of a love that needs no voice. The science of the voice becomes Alec's consuming passion. His father's visible speech system is more than a tool. It is a window into the soul of language. Melville Bell has mapped the mouth like a cartographer maps a new continent. He has created symbols that represent not letters, but the positions and actions of the vocal organs. With it, any sound from any language can be written down and reproduced. Alec masters this system at a young age, and he and his brothers often put on demonstrations. They invite friends over and then leave the room while the friends whisper words to Melville. He writes them in visible speech symbols on a chalkboard, and when Alec returns, he studies the symbols and reproduces the whispered words exactly, even if they are in a language he has never heard. It is a game, a parlor trick, but to Alec it is proof that sound is a physical thing, a shape, a fingerprint that can be captured and recreated. He feels that if he can just understand those shapes deeply enough, he can build a machine that does what the ear does, that catches the fingerprint of a voice and imprints it somewhere else. The thought comes to him not as a lightning strike, but as a slow sunrise, growing warmer and brighter with each passing day in that quiet house. Alec takes on the name Graham when he is a young man because he wants a more distinctive name. From that point on, he is Alexander Graham Bell. He is tall, thin, with dark hair and a serious, sensitive face. He often wears a black suit, even as a young man, and carries a notebook with him everywhere. He fills the notebook with sketches and observations. He writes about the way a cat purrs, the way a violin's string vibrates, the way a stone sounds when it drops into a well. He spends long afternoons at the University of Edinburgh, sitting in on lectures about anatomy and electricity. The university is a place of ancient stone arches and quadrangles where the light falls in slanted rectangles. In the lecture halls, professors demonstrate the larynx of a sheep, stretching the vocal cords and blowing air through them to produce a bleat. Alec watches mesmerized. He is not repulsed, he is filled with wonder. The larynx is a small, moist, pink instrument, no bigger than a walnut, and yet it produces all the music and meaning of human speech. He begins to think about building an artificial larynx, an electrical mouth that could speak. He does not yet know where this thought will lead, but he turns it over in his mind like a smooth stone in his pocket, warming it with his attention. His mother's silence becomes the quiet engine of his work. He invents a device for her, a simple ear tube with a cone at one end and a narrow tip at the other. When he speaks into the cone, the sound is focused into the ear, slightly louder, more distinct. He watches her face light up as she hears the shape of a sentence she would have otherwise missed. It is a small, handmade thing of tin and rubber, but in that moment, Alec understands what a machine can do. It can restore a lost world. It can hand a voice back to someone who has had it taken away. This understanding never leaves him. Long after he becomes famous, he will continue to say that his primary interest is not the telephone, but helping the deaf. The telephone is just a byproduct of a deeper dream, the dream of letting sound reach every human ear that longs for it. In the evenings, he sits with his mother in the garden at Charlotte Square as the sunset colors the clouds rose and amber. They do not need to speak. He holds her hand and traces words onto her palm with his finger, and she answers by touching his face. The birds sing and the city murmurs, but between them there is a perfect quiet understanding, the deepest conversation of all. But this peaceful world cannot last. The Bell household, for all its warmth and learning, is touched by a shadow that Edinburgh cannot cure. The Scottish winters are damp and cold, and the narrow streets hold the chill like a tomb. Alec's two brothers, Melville and Edward, both younger than him, are frail. They catch colds that turn into deeper illnesses, and one by one they fade. First Edward dies at the age of 25, and then just 3 years later, Melville dies as well. The loss is so profound that it changes the shape of the family. The house that was once filled with the noise of 3 boys is now painfully quiet. Eliza Bell grieves deeply, and so does Alec. He is now the only surviving son. The sounds of the house change, the laughter stops, and the piano sits closed. The grief is a silence of its own, a heavy blanket. The doctors tell Alec's father that the damp climate is dangerous for the family, and that Alec himself, who has always been thin and prone to chest complaints, might be at risk. It is decided that the family must leave Edinburgh, leave Scotland, and sail across the Atlantic to a new world, a place with cleaner air and brighter sun. The news comes like a slowly turning tide, inevitable and sad. Alec walks through the streets of Edinburgh one last time, tracing the familiar cobblestones, memorizing the way the light hits the castle at dawn. He knows he may never return. The decision is made to move to Canada. Melville Bell has been offered a position to teach his visible speech system in Boston, but the family decides to settle first in the province of Ontario, where the air is dry and the winters are bright. The journey across the Atlantic in 1870 is a long, quiet voyage. The ship slides out of the harbor on a gray morning, and Alec stands at the rail, watching the outline of Britain dissolve into the mist. The sea is calm, a vast gray-blue plate that stretches to every edge of the world. For days and days, there is only the steady drum of the ship's engines and the cry of seabirds. Alec spends the voyage reading, sketching, and standing on deck at night, watching the stars that seem enormous and close. The sound of the ocean is a constant, deep respiration, the breathing of the planet. He finds it comforting. There is no human voice to trouble his thoughts, only the soft stir of wind and water. His mother sits in a deck chair under a blanket, her hand resting on the railing, feeling the vibration of the ship's wheel. Alec knows she is listening to the ship in her own way. They do not speak much about the brothers they have lost. The grief is still too raw to be shaped into words. Instead, they let the sea carry it for them, the silent, patient water that receives all sorrows. At last, the ship enters the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the air changes. It becomes sharper, cleaner, with a hint of pine and wildflowers. The coastline of Quebec appears, a long line of dark green forest dotted with small wooden houses and church steeples. The Bells disembark at Montreal and then travel by train and carriage deeper into the countryside, heading toward a small town called Brantford in Ontario. The landscape unrolls before them like a painting. There are green, rolling hills, wide meadows dotted with wildflowers, and rivers that move slow and brown through the shade of maple trees. Everything is so much larger and emptier than the narrow, layered streets of Edinburgh. There is space, an abundance of space, and the silence here is not the silence of loss, but of possibility. Alec breathes in the new air and feels his lungs expand, his whole body relaxing for the first time in years. He watches a red-winged blackbird perch on a fence post and sing its strange, mechanical song, and he thinks about how different that song will sound at the other end of a wire if he can ever find a way to send it there. The carriage turns down a long lane, and at the end, tucked among tall elm trees, is their new home, a simple white farmhouse called Tutela Heights. The last of the afternoon sun is catching on the windows, turning them gold, and Eliza Bell reaches up her hand to feel the warmth on her palm. Alec watches her and knows that this new land will be a place of healing and, perhaps, of miraculous invention. The house at Tutela Heights stands on a rise overlooking the Grand River, and from the porch, all you can see is sky and trees and the slow, silver thread of water winding through the valley below. The air tastes of pine and damp earth, a clean, green flavor that Alec breathes in deeply every morning. The farmhouse itself is simple, with white clapboard walls and a red roof, surrounded by mature elms and maples. Inside, the rooms are bright and filled with the kind of quiet that comes from being surrounded by nature. There is no city noise here, no carriage wheels or street vendors, only the distant lowing of cattle and the rustle of wind through the cornfields. Alec chooses a back room as his workshop. It is a small, rectangular space with a single window that looks out onto a wildflower meadow sloping down to a creek. The floor is covered with a plain wooden desk, some shelves his father has helped him build, and a cabinet for tools. On his desk, he lays out his precious books, his notebooks, and the few pieces of scientific apparatus he has brought from Scotland, a tuning fork, a battery cell, several coils of copper wire, a magnet, and a small hand-cranked induction coil. Everything has a place, and he moves between the tools with the gentle precision of a watchmaker. The workshop becomes his sanctuary. Each morning after breakfast, he walks down the short hallway and closes the door behind him, stepping into a world of quiet experimentation. The window is often open, letting in the sound of birdsong and the smell of wild roses. He pulls up a stool and sits, not hunched with frantic energy, but with the patient stillness of a man who knows that understanding takes time. He reads, he sketches, he winds wire around a bobbin, and he watches the needle of a galvanometer tremble when he connects a circuit. He is fascinated by electromagnetism, the strange new science that links a flowing current to a physical force. He uses a tuning fork to study resonance, striking it gently and holding it near an electromagnet, marveling at the way the pitch can be sustained electrically. He writes in his notebook, "If you could make a current of electricity imitate the vibrations of the air that produce sound, you could send any sound, even speech, over a wire." The thought seems impossibly grand, but he writes it down calmly, in the same steady handwriting he uses to note the weather. He is not in a hurry. The world outside, the quiet Canadian countryside, seems to encourage a slow, gradual blooming. The Grand River becomes a place of deep reflection for him. In the late afternoons, when the light softens and the insects begin their evening chorus, Alec walks down the long grassy slope to the water's edge. He sits on a fallen log and watches the current, a sheet of dark liquid glass that reflects the upside-down trees along the bank. He thinks about the Greek myth of the wire that carried the voices of the gods, and he thinks about his mother, back at the house, who cannot hear the river at all. He skims a stone across the surface and watches the concentric circles spread and fade. Sound waves, he knows, spread in much the same way, outward, ever outward, until they lose energy and become indistinguishable from the background noise of the world. If he were to capture that pattern exactly at the source, before it disperses, and recreate it somewhere else, the voice would be reborn. He picks up another stone and holds it, not throwing it, just feeling the smooth weight. That stone, he thinks, is like an idea. You can hold it in your hand for a long time, warming it, before you let it go. He returns to the house as the sky turns pink and mauve, and he finds his mother on the porch, her chair turned to catch the last warmth of the sun. He sits beside her and places her hand on his arm. He tells her, without speaking, that he is working on something important, and she smiles. In the workshop, Alec constructs a curious device known as the ear phonautograph. He takes the ear of a dead man, a real human ear, obtained from a medical school, and carefully preserves it in a jar. Then he attaches a piece of straw to the tiny bones of the inner ear, and at the other end of the straw, a piece of smoked glass. When he speaks into the ear, the vibration travels through the ear canal, vibrates the eardrum and the bones, and the straw scratches a wavy line into the soot on the glass. He is making language visible, just as his father did, but using a machine. The contraption sits on his desk like a strange, delicate sculpture. It is slightly macabre, but to Alec it is profoundly beautiful. It proves that the ear is a mechanical transducer, a bridge between the world of air and the world of nerve. If you could reverse the process, if you could make a mechanical ear that spoke instead of listened, you would have a telephone. The idea is so close he can almost taste it. He works on the phonautograph for weeks, adjusting the tension of the membrane, the length of the straw. He works in a pool of light from an oil lamp, the flame making a tiny echo of the sun. Outside, the crickets sing their own telegraphic rhythm, and the moon rises over the meadow, silvering the wildflowers. The whole world seems to be humming, and Alec is tuning into the frequency. His health, which had always been delicate, improves dramatically in the Canadian air. He puts on weight, his cheeks gain color, and he sleeps deeply for the first time in years. The grief of losing his brother settles into a quieter place, a gentle melancholy that does not hinder him but deepens his appreciation for the briefness of life. He dedicates himself even more fiercely to his work, not with desperation, but with a sense of purpose. He takes on teaching duties in Boston, traveling down to the United States to instruct teachers of the deaf, using his father's visible speech system. The journey from Brantford to Boston is long, by train through New York State and the Berkshires, a journey of sleeping cars and changing landscapes. He enjoys the rhythm of the rails, the gentle swaying of the train car, the sound of the whistle in the distance at night. He sits in his seat with a notebook open, designing improvements to the telegraph. The conventional telegraph can only send one message at a time, a series of dots and dashes. He dreams of a harmonic telegraph that can send multiple messages simultaneously, each using a different pitch, like notes in a chord. He pitches the idea to investors in Boston, and they provide him with a small stipend and a workshop there. So now he has two workshops, the sunny back room in Brantford, filled with the sound of birds, and a brick room in Boston, filled with the sound of horse-drawn wagons and the distant bells of the city. In both, he chases the same quiet dream. In the Boston workshop, he hires a young electrical mechanic named Thomas A. Watson. Watson is a man in his early 20s with clever hands and a patient, methodical nature. He understands the physical building of things, the wiring and the screws and the delicate adjustments. Alec is the theorist, the man with the vision, but he often lacks the precision to turn a drawing into a working instrument. Watson brings that precision. They become a team, not a dramatic partnership of shouting and breakthroughs, but a steady collaboration built on shared silence and mutual respect. Watson sets up a bench across the room, and for months they work side by side, Alec explaining his ideas in his careful, Scottish-inflected voice, Watson listening and then turning the idea into brass and wire. The room smells of solder and oil, a clean, metallic smell that Alec comes to associate with progress. Sunlight falls through the dusty window in long, peaceful shafts. They test the harmonic telegraph, and it works in fits and starts. The devices hum and buzz. Watson wins coils with infinite patience. Alec draws and erases and draws again. All the while, in the back of his mind, beneath the immediate goal of the telegraph, the telephone waits, like a seed beneath the snow. The breakthrough, when it comes, is not a thunderclap but a small, quiet moment in the midst of an ordinary day. On June 2nd, 1875, Alec and Watson are testing the harmonic telegraph. Watson is in one room, plucking a tuned steel reed that is part of a transmitter. Alec is in the other room, listening at a receiver. Something goes wrong. The reed is screwed too tightly and it doesn't vibrate. Instead, it touches the electromagnet and completes a continuous circuit. Alec, listening, does not hear a single pure tone. He hears a buzz, a complex noise that contains many frequencies, and he realizes that the device is not just transmitting an on and off signal, it is transmitting the actual shape of the sound wave, the complex vibration of the reed's movement. He leaps up, not in a shout, but in a moment of profound, calm clarity. He knows what he has discovered. He runs to the other room and tells Watson not to adjust anything, to leave the contact exactly as it is. His voice is even, but his eyes are bright. Watson, he says, leave everything as it is. I have just thought of something. He immediately begins drawing a new design, a device that would use a membrane and a moving armature to replicate the human ear. The telephone was born in that silence between a buzz and a spoken word, on an ordinary afternoon in a dusty workshop, with the light falling softly through the window, and two young men standing very still, feeling the shape of the future just out of reach. The months that follow are a period of intense but quiet labor. Alec Bell, now 30 years old, divides his time between his teaching duties in Boston and his experiments in the workshop. The design in his notebook begins to take physical shape. It is a device of simple elegance, a funnel-shaped mouthpiece, a thin iron membrane, and an electromagnet with a coil of insulated wire. When sound waves enter the mouthpiece, they cause the membrane to vibrate. The membrane, in turn, moves a small piece of iron armature near the magnet, generating a varying electric current that mirrors the original sound wave. At the receiving end, the process is reversed. The varying current causes a similar membrane to vibrate, reproducing the sound. It is a mirror system, an electrical ear and an electrical mouth, speaking back and forth. Alec and Watson build the first model in the Boston workshop. The room is on the top floor, under the eaves, where the roof slopes and the window frames a piece of sky. Outside, The Boston winter is gray with snow, and the lamps in the streets burn with a soft yellow glow. Inside, the two men work in a bubble of warmth from a small coal stove. Their breath mists the air as they bend over the instrument, tightening screws, adjusting the spacing between the membrane and the magnet. The device is small enough to hold in two hands, like a precious object, which it is. Alec files a patent for an improvement in telegraphy on February 14, 1876, an application that describes the principle of variable resistance undulatory current. Hours later, a rival inventor named Elisha Gray files a caveat for a similar device, but Bell's patent arrives first. The legalities are complex, but in the quiet space of the workshop, such things feel far away. Alec has no interest in rivalry. He is interested in the pure physics of the thing. He wants to hear a human voice travel through a wire, not as a buzz or a beep, but as an intelligible, living presence. The patent is just a formality, a piece of paper that exists to protect the dream. The real work continues at the bench. On the afternoon of March 10, 1876, 3 days after the patent was granted, the breakthrough occurs. It is a Friday. The weather has been raw and wet, and the atmosphere is one of subdued patience. Alec and Watson are working in separate rooms, connected by a wire running down the corridor. In Bell's room, the transmitter is a small cup filled with acid and water, into which a wire connected to a membrane dips. The variable resistance of the liquid is the crucial mechanism. Watson waits in the other room, pressing a metal receiver to his ear. Bell speaks into the mouthpiece of the new transmitter. His voice is calm, not a shout, not an exclamation. He says, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." The sentence is perfectly ordinary, the kind of thing you might say to a colleague across a desk. But the moment is anything but ordinary. The sound travels through the acid, changes the current, runs along the wire, and emerges in the receiver against Watson's ear with a clarity that is startlingly human. Watson does not hear a distorted echo or a garbled noise. He hears the exact pitch, the slight Scottish lilt, the timbre of Bell's voice, as if the man were standing right next to him, speaking through a tube. He recognizes the voice instantly. The words are so clear, so unmistakably personal, that Watson drops the receiver and runs down the hall, his footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. He bursts into Bell's room, his face alight not with shock but with a dawning joy. "I heard you," he says. "I heard every word." Bell is standing by the transmitter, still holding the mouthpiece, his eyes wide and his expression one of a man who has been holding his breath for a long time and has just remembered how to exhale. He does not shout or dance. Instead, he gestures for Watson to sit down, and they repeat the experiment again and again, changing roles, speaking simple sentences into the machine. The afternoon light fades outside, and the room grows dim, but they continue, bound together by the miracle they have just touched. The first telephone call was not a dramatic event for the world. It was a quiet act of friendship and scientific verification between two men in a dusty attic. No one else heard it. The city of Boston continued its noisy life below, the horses plodding through the muddy streets, the shops closing their shutters, the gas lamps flickering on. But in that small room, the shape of the future had shifted. Bell and Watson spent the next few months improving the device, demonstrating it to curious visitors who came to the workshop. They would sing songs, recite poetry, and sometimes just whisper into the transmitter, marveling at how the smallest breath could be carried. The range of the telephone began to grow, from a few rooms to a few streets, from a few miles to eventually hundreds. Alec brought the telephone home to Brantford, stretching a wire from the house down to the Grand River and back again, and sitting on the porch, he watched his mother hold the receiver to her ear and feel the vibration of his voice through the earpiece. The look on her face was the most profound reward. She did not hear his words clearly, but she felt the rhythm, the presence, the nearness of her son. It was the completion of a circle that had started long ago in a walled garden in Edinburgh. The telephone, for Bell, was never just a technology. It was a bridge between people, an act of love made of wire and iron. The Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia opens in the summer of 1876, a vast celebration of the nation's 100th birthday, and Bell is invited to demonstrate his new invention. The setting is Machinery Hall, one of the great buildings of the fair, with its iron and glass ceilings soaring high above, the light falling in magnificent soft shafts. The hall is filled with steam engines and looms, and all the clattering marvels of the age. Bell sets up his simple telephone in a small corner, with a wire running to a receiver 100 yards away. The judges come by, a group of distinguished men led by Dom Pedro II, the Emperor of Brazil, an intelligent and scientifically curious ruler. Bell speaks into the transmitter, and from the receiver comes the clear sound of Hamlet's soliloquy, "To be or not to be." The Emperor, pressing the receiver to his ear, starts back in amazement. "My God," he murmurs, "it talks." The quiet words send a thrill through the crowd that gathers. The telephone, which had seemed like a modest parlor trick, is suddenly the talk of the exhibition. Bell does not boast or preen. He simply stands beside his device, his long black coat and his pale, earnest face, patiently explaining the principle to anyone who asks. He does not view it as a commercial wonder, but as a gift to the world, a way to erase distance. The telephone begins its slow spread across America. The first telephone exchange is established in New Haven, Connecticut, in 1878, with a switchboard that connects 21 subscribers. The operators, often young women with soft voices, sit in a row in a quiet room, plugging cords into jacks, gently connecting lives. The telephone wires begin to string along the streets, black lines against the sky, as subtle and organic as vines. Bell's company, the Bell Telephone Company, is formed, but Alec himself steps back from the business. He has no interest in stock prices or corporate battles. He marries Mabel Hubbard, one of his deaf pupils, a woman of great intelligence and warmth, and they begin a life together built on the same quiet principles he has always known. Their home is a place of soft sounds and deliberate speech, of hand-holding and notes written on slates. Mabel, like his mother, communicates through touch and feeling, and Bell pours his love and his tenderness into making her world as full of music as he can. They take walks in the country, and he lets her feel the vibration of a cello string, or the hum of a factory machine, or his own heartbeat. The telephone sits in the corner of their parlor, an ordinary object now, but still a source of quiet wonder. The world is changing, growing smaller and more connected, all because a man once listened very carefully to silence. The telephone wires spread across the continent and then under the oceans. By 1915, the first transcontinental telephone line is completed, spanning from New York to San Francisco. On January 25th of that year, Bell is invited to recreate the first call. He sits in the New York office, the same slender, white-bearded man he has become, his deep-set eyes calm and kind. In San Francisco, Watson waits, now an old man himself, his hands still steady. The connection is made, and Bell lifts the receiver. He speaks the same words he spoke 39 years earlier. "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." But this time, Watson answers that he would be glad to, but it will take him a week. They both laugh softly, a gentle sound that travels 3,000 miles. The distance is nothing to the voice. Bell puts down the receiver and looks out the window at the city below, but he is not thinking about the millions of telephones now in use, the global network he has begun. He is thinking about his mother, who died many years before, who never heard his voice through the telephone but who felt it through her hands. He is thinking about the quiet workshop in Brantford, the sound of the Grand River, the wild roses blooming under the window. The voice across the wire is, in the end, just a voice. What matters is the silence it fills, the loneliness it eases, the love it carries. In the last decades of his life, Alexander Graham Bell finds his truest rest in a place called Baddeck, a small village on the shores of Bras d'Or Lake in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. He first sees the lake in 1885, during a summer trip with Mabel, and the moment he lays eyes on the still, silver water framed by low, green mountains, he feels he has found his home. The air here is cool and salty, filled with the scent of pine and spruce. The light is clear and northern, a pale gold that stretches long in the afternoons. Belle purchases a large piece of land on a hill overlooking the lake and begins to build a summer estate he calls Bainbrig, a Gaelic phrase meaning beautiful mountain. The house takes shape slowly, a sprawling wooden structure with wide verandas, peaked roofs, and huge windows that frame the water like living paintings. It is reached by a winding lane through dark woods, and as you approach, the trees open to reveal a sweep of sky and lake, a view that makes you stop and breathe more deeply. Belle designs the house with an emphasis on light, air, and the feeling of being connected to the natural world. Every room has a window opening onto the water, and the veranda is furnished with wicker chairs and soft cushions, where he and Mabel sit for hours, watching the play of light on the lake. At Bainbrig, Belle builds himself a new workshop, a large, barn-like building perched near the edge of the hill. It is a far cry from the cramped attic in Boston. It is a place of light and space, with high ceilings, white walls, and many windows that look out onto the lake. Here, he pursues a wide range of experiments far beyond the telephone. He becomes fascinated with flight, with the possibility of building a heavier-than-air craft. He and a group of young engineers, whom he calls the Aerial Experiment Association, construct enormous kites out of bamboo and silk, kites that look like giant dragonflies. On calm summer mornings, they carry the kites down to the meadow by the lake, and Belle watches as they rise into the blue air, steady and silent, tethered by fine wire. He studies how they ride the currents, how the light shines through the red silk, how the wind makes a soft, singing note through the struts. The work is patient, full of small adjustments and quiet observation. There are no dramatic crashes or explosions, only the slow, peaceful process of learning from nature. The kites drift above the lake, and the only sounds are the lapping of water on the shore and the distant call of loons. The lake itself is Belle's constant companion. He loves to row out onto Bras d'Or in a wooden boat, sometimes alone, sometimes with Mabel or a friend. He rows slowly, letting the oars dip without effort, feeling the water's resistance give way. The lake is nearly tideless, a vast inland sea that reflects the sky with such perfect clarity that it is hard to tell where the water ends and the air begins. On clear days, the mountains along the shore are mirrored in the surface, creating a double world, one above and one below. Belle often carries a notebook in his pocket, and when an idea strikes him, he pauses in his rowing, sets down the oars, and writes a few sentences while the boat drifts. The ideas that come here are different from the ones in the workshop. They are broader, more philosophical. He thinks about the nature of sound, the way the voice connects us, the future of the human family. He thinks about his mother and father, now gone, and about his brothers whose laughter he still sometimes hears in his dreams. The quiet of the lake holds all these thoughts gently, without judgment. The sun warms his face, and the rocking of the boat is like a heartbeat. Mabel Belle is, as she has always been, the center of his world. At Bedeck, their life together takes on a rhythm of mutual care and shared silence. Mabel, completely deaf since childhood, moves through the house with a grace born of a lifetime of adaptation. She feels footsteps through the floor, senses a door closing through the draft, and reads lips with an uncanny precision that makes visitors forget she cannot hear. She and Belle develop a private sign language and a gentle way of touching hands to communicate across a room. In the evenings, they often sit on the veranda in the long twilight that lasts until nearly 10 o'clock in the northern summer. Belle tells her about his day, speaking slowly and carefully, sometimes letting her place her fingers on his lips to feel the shape of the words. She tells him about the garden, the birds she has seen, the letters from friends. Her voice is a low, musical sound that she cannot hear, but she knows the vibration it makes in her throat, and she knows that Belle finds it beautiful. They watch the stars come out, one by one, reflected in the dark mirror of the lake, and they sit together in a profound contentedness, two people who have turned silence into a shared canvas. The kites lead to larger flying machines, and eventually Belle witnesses the flight of the Silver Dart, one of the earliest airplanes to fly in Canada. But even this achievement, which takes place on the frozen lake in winter, is a quiet affair. The plane is a delicate construction of bamboo, wire, and pale fabric, and it lifts off the ice with a soft whir, rising just a few feet into the cold, still air. Bell stands on the ice, wrapped in a long coat and fur hat, his breath making clouds in the frosty air. He watches the plane fly for nearly a kilometer before it lands gently, skidding to a stop. There is no cheering crowd, only a few engineers and friends who have worked on the project. The silence after the engine cuts is complete, and the white landscape glows in the winter sun. Bell walks across the ice to the plane, runs his hand along its wing, and smiles. It is the same gentle smile that crossed his face in the attic in Boston, the smile of a man who has seen an idea become real. He tucks his hands into his pockets and looks out at the frozen lake, seeing not the achievement itself, but the long, peaceful path that led to it. In his later years, Bell's beard turns completely white, and his face takes on the kind, creased look of a grandfather from a storybook. He continues to work, but more slowly. The experiments in the workshop become simpler, more meditative. He designs a vacuum jacket to assist artificial respiration. He improves the phonograph. He tinkers with a machine that could desalinate seawater. The inventions are born not of a need for fame, but of a gentle curiosity that never left him. He spends long hours just watching the light change on the lake, or walking along the woodland paths with Mabel, pointing out wild orchids and birds' nests. He has, in many ways, returned to the boy who listened to silence in an Edinburgh garden. The world has changed immeasurably since those days. The telephone is now everywhere, a forest of wires and a hum of voices that encircles the globe. But Bell rarely uses the telephone himself. He prefers letters or face-to-face speech or the touch of a hand. He knows what the machine can do, but he also knows that its greatest gift is not the words it carries, but the silences it bridges, the gaps of distance and loneliness it can close. On August 2nd, 1922, Alexander Graham Bell dies peacefully at Bainbridge, in his bed with the windows open to the summer air. He is 75 years old. Mabel is by his side. In the hour of his death, as a mark of the world's respect, every telephone on the continent of North America is silenced for 1 minute. It is not a moment of mourning but of tribute, a collective pause in the endless conversation he made possible. And in that minute, the silence that Bell understood so deeply returns to the wires. It is a silence not of emptiness, but of fullness, like the silence between musical notes. Outside the windows of Bainbridge, Bras d'Or Lake lies still and silver in the August light. The pines stir slightly in the breeze. A loon calls, its haunting, echoing note traveling across the water, and then all is quiet. The man who gave humanity the gift of voices across distance has himself become a voice that lives on in every call, every whispered hello, every connection made. And in the peaceful evening, as the sky over the lake turns lavender and gold, Mabel sits on the veranda, looking out at the water. She does not need to hear the loon. She can feel the peace in the wood of the house, in the warmth of the fading sun, and in the memory of a hand that once held hers and taught her that silence could speak.